All right, last time we were talking about phosphorus fertilizer. And I want to wrap up with phosphorus today, talk a little bit about carbon. We'll see where we can get with that. And then next week I'll have a lecture on GMOs, and then I'll dive right into proteins. I'll talk about the genetic paradigm, where proteins come from, what the role of DNA is. Most of you probably already have a fairly good idea of that. Hopefully I'll give you guys some new information that's interesting to you. And then we'll start with our discussion of proteins by the middle of the week. So historically, phosphorus fertilizer was mostly obtained through the use of waste, animal waste, whether it is manure or guano, even human excreta has been used as fertilizer. Animal waste is highly enriched in phosphorus, which makes it, and it also has nitrogen in it, makes it an excellent fertilizer. You can see, however, that starting in the middle of the 20th century, the extraction of phosphate from rock began to skyrocket. It began to skyrocket. And quickly, by the time your parents were born, maybe, the use of inorganic phosphate as extracted from geological sources exceeded that of the use from manure and other waste products. Yes, sir.
Why is human excreta on there? Excreta?
Because it was used as a type of...
Do we still use it today?
We'll get to that question.
We should. Otherwise, it's just sitting there.
Keep thinking that. We'll get to it. Unfortunately, there's not enough human shit on the earth to feed us all. So we do need more phosphorus than you can find in human excreta.
Really? How much is in human excretion? How much?
I don't have the numbers on how much human excreta is produced every year. I'd like to. That's a number I'd like to be able to whip out. I'll take that under advisement. You can develop the lab and bring it forward. I'll consider it.
Lunch.
Yeah, that's a first. I'll have to get back to you on that number. I don't know the number. But let's push this forward a little bit. So this is the numbers so far. We can see that extraction from phosphate from rock has really exploded. No pun intended. Some of that phosphate is obviously going towards explosives. But let's see what the future holds. So the thing about phosphate in geological sources, most of the phosphate on Earth is extremely dilute, and it is not economically feasible to extract it from rock. Most of the economically feasible phosphate that's available to extraction, that is like concentrations, high concentrations of phosphate. Predictions are that by the time you guys are getting ready to roll over, is going to be mostly tapped out, right? So we have about another 100 years of phosphate available to us. And people say, get worried about peak oil. Well, the thing about oil is it's just a source of energy, and there are other options. Oil can be replaced. Phosphate cannot be replaced. It is an element. You had been asking this question the other day. What can we just come up, or maybe it was, I don't remember who it was. Yeah, can't we just replace it with something? we cannot. We need that element. It cannot be created in any other way. So the options are, reduce, reuse, recycle. These are the options. There's only a limited amount of phosphorus on Earth, and we need to see it as a limited resource that needs to be genuinely sustainably managed. Oil, talking about oil sustainability, well, oil is not sustainable either. There are just other options. Fresh water, the way we're treating our fresh water, the methods we're using of treating our fresh water aren't sustainable, but there's a vast amount of water on Earth, and we can come up with other ways of utilizing it. This phosphorus is a real problem. So, for example, this guy here, Jeremy Grantham, is one of these hedge fund managers and investment strategists. He wrote in Nature, I guess a while ago now, 7 years ago, that consumption of P, quote, must be drastically reduced in the next 20 to 40 years, or the planet will begin to starve. Our ability to feed 8, 10, 12, wherever peak population hits, billion people on Earth is dependent upon our ability to feed them, which is in turn dependent upon our ability to get phosphorus into the soil to grow the crops that are necessary, right? So thinking about different ways of utilizing this resource, thinking about impact in terms of, caloric output of the crops we're producing and the energy that we're putting into it is smart. And so then you can look at this projection here shows that the demand for phosphorus is going to exceed the supply of phosphorus. The global demand is going to exceed the global production and supply of phosphorus in another 15 years. So that's really soon, right? That's by the time you guys get to my stage. By the time you are up here being whatever type of leader, whatever type of consumer, whatever role you play in our society, this is going to become the reality. And when demand exceeds supply, we're going to have market forces are going to begin to get imbalanced, and economic inequality is going to become an incredibly big component of food availability on Earth. Right? So, interestingly, some of the largest sources of phosphate on Earth come from Africa and Asia, two of the continents that have the highest number of developing nations. And where is most of that phosphorus going? Obviously, it's not going to feed just those nations on those continents, right? So I don't know. I don't want to open it up to a huge sociological debate here, but it does have echoes of colonial pasts and the post-colonial realities in some of these places in terms of resource extraction and utilization as it relates to food sovereignty in these different parts of the world. So something to think about. So I have this statistic down here. Critical to contemporary agriculture, the annual demand for phosphate is rising nearly twice as fast as the growth of the human population. Why is that, do you think? Why is the annual demand for phosphate growing at twice the growth rate of the human population? Yeah. We're demanding more meat. And so is that you and me? North America's probably hit peak meat, right? It's these parts of the world that had more grain-based diets, more vegetable-based diets, simpler diets. and they're westernizing their diet, going to more phosphorus-intensive types of food. Yeah. Okay. So, this is just one sort of gee whiz interesting thing I'm going to show you.
I knew we were going to do something like this.
Yeah. Well, maybe.
Colby.
Hey, man, you start it. You get on it. I will sponsor that club, the P-Cycling, the Colby P-Cyclers. Why not? So there's this company that started in Brattleboro, Vermont, that collects domestic wastewater, and specifically urine. So urine is about less than 1% of domestic wastewater. We use a huge amount of water, actually, for our commodes and washing and whatever in the average American household. But the urine itself has 80% of the nitrogen in domestic wastewater and 55% of the phosphorus. So in very real terms, urine is kind of liquid gold when it comes to being able to retrieve these nutrients that are essential for producing food. So here's a picture of this guy from a septic service that's pumping urine that has been specifically collected. So the way this company works is you would urinate into a special collection, like a special commode that isolates the urine from the rest of the wastewater stream in the household. And then this service comes and carts it off and manages it for you. So it says a family of 3 can produce almost 300 gallons of urine in 8 months. That's a lot. That's actually quite a bit of nitrogen and phosphorus. That's just going down the drain normally. So then the urine goes into these solar sanitation cells, where they get sealed up in here for 30 days. And pretty actually low-tech treatment facility that their thinking is that it can have scalability because of that low cost, low tech treatment. And so then here is someone on the board of this company taking this applicator, and they mix the urine down after it's been sanitized and treated, and they put it on their crops. And there's this whole series of test plots that they're doing out in Vermont. But at the end of the day, they have shown that it is a viable fertilizer, a viable source of nitrogen and phosphorus for the production of different pasturage, silage, grains, and grasses. So, kind of interesting. I don't know how rapidly. No, I don't know whether this is going to solve the problem. It seems like it won't be the only solution, but it's part of a sort of comprehensive approach to the problem, or at least raising awareness that most people, if I were to ask most people, what is, have you guys heard of the term Anthropocene before? All right, who hasn't heard of the term Anthropocene? So the word Anthropocene, if you look back, you all heard of like Jurassic Park, right? Jurassic is like a geological time era. It's a period in Earth. You can break the history of Earth up into these geological time periods, and the time period that most of human civilization has existed in was called the Holocene, and it was characterized by very stable climate patterns, very stable climate patterns, which enabled agriculture, the rise of agriculture and the production of food. However, what are called Earth systems scientists who think about large geological and biological integrative forces that are sculpting, the biosphere, Earth itself. They have determined that really we are in, by various metrics, we're in a different geological time period as of the last 100 years or so. And they're calling it the Anthropocene because humans, have made such a profound impact on a number of these indices of life or determinants of a geological time period that we're really not in the Holocene anymore. And one of these indices of the geological time period is the amount of phosphorus, nitrogen pollution, and particularly phosphorus that has been perturbed in the biosphere, and that huge extraction of phosphate from mineral sources is one of the things that it's like we're not going back. We're not putting that phosphate back in the rock. That takes millions of years. And so that's one of the things that we have to contend with. All right, any questions on phosphorus? Thoughts? What do you think? Does any of it seem relevant to you or pertinent or alarming or interesting, or I don't know. What are your thoughts about it? How do you feel like it relates to you? This is sort of going back to the conversation that you guys should have been having last time in class, but I didn't get to hear quite everybody's thoughts. Mm-hmm. It's not going to be gone. Don't misinterpret that graph. Demand is going to exceed supply is what's going to happen. And that's going to change the pricing structure of fertilizer, which will then impact the price of food. I didn't say the readily available phosphorus would be gone until after the 22nd century rolls. But I'm sorry, just so that you are not misinterpreting that data.
It's already.
I think it is alarming for sure. Any other thoughts? Contrasting thoughts. What do you think?
Oh, contrast. Too right, I think.
Mm-hmm.
P. Colby P cyclers.
Colby P cyclers, yeah. What do you think, Zach? Or Will?
I don't know. I think this creates a pretty good business. And hopefully, when the prices start to rise from this will become a business opportunity that can cool infrastructure changes and in plumbing and whatnot that allows for to collect all of mankind's urine.
What do you think the biggest impediment to this is?
The cost of fixing the entire plumbing system and structure so that people's pee is a commodity. But it would be very expensive to rip out all the plumbing systems that we've had for centuries or 50, 60 years, replacing them hopefully within a short time, maybe a longer time. Congress would have to pony up the money to do that.
Also, just volume.
So he's suggesting a top-down approach. You're suggesting a market-based approach. Those are kind of two different things, and each of those has their impediments. And obviously, there are political impediments to top-down approaches. There are infrastructural aspects to market-driven approaches. What's another problem with this? Maybe to like get you to see what I'm seeing. Who came into this? Yeah, Theo.
Just gonna say, like, as our population, like our use, yes, um, thoughtful about otherwise, our population probably which that population.
So you have a dim view of human behavior, is what you're saying. That humans will just continue to do what is easy for them until it's and without heeding a warning, and just go until something breaks, and then have to figure out how to deal with it. Then is that what? So I understand what you're saying.
I mean, that's not to say that the idea to come up with a solution isn't true, but it's a question of what is that 12 people. At that point, it's harder solution, especially.
Mm-hmm. One of you guys.
I'm worried about source instant, but it's possible. We already saw it happen. Oil in region by the United States, so I'm worried about.
Mm-hmm.
They'll become logical. But also,
I just had a counterpoint to population growth. I can't say anything about developing countries, but in developed countries, population growth is steadily, it's curving downwards away from the boom that it was in like the baby boom era when it was just a straight up line. It's starting to moderate out as I know people are living longer than ever, but eventually our population is going to be growing still. Will always be growing, hopefully. But I wouldn't worry about like America specifically. Our population growth has slowed considerably from where it was in 60s, 70s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this is a complicated topic, right? Population is a pretty complicated topic. It does relate to food. Obviously, I showed the correlation between labile nitrogen production and population, how the Haber-Bosch process really enabled the boom. But population is also tied to economy, right? And so it's one thing, the model of economic growth, whatever that means. What is driving economic growth? I mean, America is at more or less maximal efficiency right now. Economic growth is dependent upon population growth, and so if whatever model, whatever the ideal is, whatever we think is sustainable, that's going to have implications in terms of the way we, broadly across many sectors of our society. Who came into this classroom thinking, shit, phosphorus is a problem? who came into this class, not this class, but this course, thinking phosphorus was a problem? Nobody. Nobody in this room, right? And you guys are all in this room because you're reasonably well-educated individuals with access to, at least access to the fruits of a well-developed nation in terms of an educational system and whatever, right? So in the global scale, you guys have hit the lottery just by being in here in terms of your access to resources and understanding and knowledge. If you guys came into this classroom not knowing that phosphorus was a problem, isn't communication a huge problem? Like getting people to understand this graph right here, to understand what the implications of that graph are and what kind of picture that may paint in terms of our societies, right? That's a problem, right? You can talk about political problems from top down or infrastructure issues. It's a matter of getting people to understand what the facts are, what the predictions are, what the models are, and what implications those have, so that you can engender the kind of will to address the problem. We know that people in general are not particularly compelled by facts as well. They're not particularly compelled by facts. And so, yeah, it's one thorny part of a very complex problem that we're dealing with. All right, let's move on. Unless there's any other thoughts that you guys want to share about the greener side of the grass. Is there any green grass anywhere for anybody? Yeah.
I just had a question.
Yeah, so you'll have to go to the literature to see what has been published about their approach, and I'm sure there has been work. This is just I'm pulling this from pop culture reporting here, but in a comparison between the effectiveness of this type of fertilizer to some other more industrial type of fertilizer, that's an interesting question because I don't know how acutely they can control the phosphorus and nitrogen ratio, which is extremely important. I think I kind of alluded to that a little bit earlier. And in a conventional fertilizer, that's what you're controlling really exquisitely, is that ratio between phosphorus and nitrogen. Dependent upon, each crop sort of has its own, and each soil has its own requirements. So I don't know how this is the short answer, but I would imagine that the more control you have over that ratio, the better your outcome is going to be. So, and this reporting. So I put this series of slides together last year in the fall. So, which was probably already a couple years old at that point. So I don't know exactly where this is now. This is probably this info here is probably 3 years old, something like that. So maybe they've explored that. All right. So on to carbon. Are there any other questions? Let's go back to Aristotle just for a minute. Aristotle, he had 4 elements. He thought the universe was made of 4 elements: earth, air, fire, and water, which had these different properties: moistness and dryness, warmth and coolness. And it really wasn't until a couple thousand years later or more that people really began to say, oh, that's not quite correct. That the elements, there are all these other irreducible substances that seem like they are actually the elements. And one of the people is this guy, a scientist named Lavoisier. He discovered oxygen, for example. And let's take a look at some of the work he did. He's pretty interesting. He also recognized carbon as an element. He didn't discover it. Carbon had, in the form of charcoal, had been recognized since the ancient times. But he explored the relationship between carbon and oxygen. Him and his wife, Antoine Lavoisier, often gets all the laurels, but indeed it was a fortuitous partnership with the woman that he married, Marie-Anne Lavoisier, that made his work so impactful. It was the two of them. He was actually apparently a little bit of a scattered individual. Wasn't able to organize his thoughts and his work especially well, and it was her incisive ability to recognize the diamond in the rough, so to speak, amongst a lot of his work and thoughts that enabled him to do experiments, organize his work into publishable form. So the two of them, little prop for her. One of the things that Lavoisier discovered was the idea of combustion. That was taking carbon, elemental carbon of some form, or some reduced form of carbon, and combining it with oxygen. All right, the burning of charcoal is an example of this. And why am I talking about this? Well, it turns out that that exact process, the oxidization of carbon, which we call combustion, is precisely what your body is doing with the food that it eats. Right? In the simplest chemical terms, your body is combusting all the carbon that we're eating in the form of carbohydrates, some proteins and fats. We'll see how that works in a bit. He did this amazingly. This is just a gee whiz thing. Yeah, that was. Has anybody been to Paris? Anyone? I haven't. Did you guys go to the Louvre? Yeah, well, right. This was set up in front of the Louvre about 200 years ago. In 1774, Lavoisier built this enormous compound magnifying glass and took it and burned a freaking diamond. He burned a diamond, pure carbon. He oxidized a diamond and illustrated the principle of combustion and oxidization through this experiment. He basically took a diamond, put it in a bell jar, put the massive power of these magnifying glasses focused right on the diamond, burned the diamond till nothing was left, but the mass of the bell jar did not change whatsoever during that. Pretty interesting, demonstrating both combustion and the conservation of mass. Kind of a far out experiment. We will not be doing this in lab, sadly.
You mean we won't be setting actual diamonds?
Nope. And for his efforts, he lost his head. Of course, Lavoisier was taken out in the French Revolution a little bit after he burned a diamond in front of the Louvre. And obviously, there were some pretty awful aristocrats that lost their lives during the Revolution, but actually Lavoisier was an advocate for the poor and against economic inequality at the time, so it was more than most of those deaths unjust. All right, carbon. Well, somebody's already told us in class we're carbon-based life forms. This carbon-carbon bond represents energy. It represents energy. And that's what our body's doing when we're eating food. We're breaking carbon-carbon bonds, we're breaking carbon-hydrogen bonds, and we are liberating the energy that's inside of them. So, for example, A carbon-carbon bond has about 83 to 85 kilocalories per mole, and a carbon-hydrogen bond has about 99 kilocalories per mole. A kcal is the same as a big C, capital C calorie that you would see on a box of food or something, right? The way when you talk about calories, like whatever, 200 calories to go jog around the block or something like that. That's a kcal. And a mole is just a number, just like a dozen is a number. A mole is a number. It's 6.022 times 10 to the 23rd. So 6.022 times 10 to the 23rd carbon-carbon bonds, if you break them, that would represent 85 calories. So that's what you're looking at when you see a kcal per mole.
Yeah.
A kilojoule is the metric equivalent. Calories are not really a metric unit. All right. So why is it important? It's important for a lot of reasons. It helps buffer your blood. So the carbon and the carbonate that's in your blood buffers your blood. We got to keep our blood within a very narrow pH range, right around 7.4. If you go outside of that, you get super sick. If anybody's ever been in acidosis, do we have any people who've jogged? So they were on the cross country team for few weeks and they started doing it and they jogged so hard that they barfed. Does that ever happen to anybody? Yeah. Well, you're sending your body into acidosis and the body needs to remove acid, so you vomit and then it alkalizes your blood. If you get to be your blood gets too acidic, it's dangerous, or too alkaline, it's also dangerous. Yeah.
So, what happened?
Alcohol?
Yeah.
That's called alcohol poisoning, and
But it doesn't have anything to do with the.
no, it's poisoning. No, it's just a type of poisoning. Yeah, too much alcohol poisoning. Your body's like, oops, shouldn't drink that, and then you barf it out. Yeah, a little bit different. So the carbon dioxide that's in the atmosphere gets taken up by plants. We'll talk about how that works in a bit. And it releases oxygen that was attached to the carbon dioxide. So this helps the carbon helps maintain the oxygen in the atmosphere that we require for life. And the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is also not just maintaining the pH of our blood, but it's affecting the pH of the oceans. So, for example, here is this chart showing how the level of atmospheric carbon dioxide has been going up because we've been burning a lot of fossil fuels. That's also driving the concentration so that's the purple. The atmospheric carbon dioxide is in purple. The dark blue data is showing the concentration of carbon dioxide in the ocean, right? The ocean's been sucking up a lot of the carbon dioxide we've been dumping out, and that has an impact on our food chain. That does relate to our food because as carbon dioxide goes up, pH goes down. It's making it more acidic, just like a soda pop has carbonic acid in it. All those bubbles, that's just carbon dioxide that we force into the soda. It makes it more acidic. We're doing that to the oceans. We're basically turning the oceans into a can of soda pop. Not quite that extreme, but it is driving the pH of the oceans down, which is the light blue trace that you see. The noise in that, the up and down squiggles and all of that, that's just the effect of the seasons. It goes with the seasons, right? Winter and summer. Why does acidic oceans affect our food chain? Anyone want to speculate on that?
Say like that, for a lot of populations in the ocean source.
Mm-hmm.
So and more even have drastic effects.
That's right.
So basically
Mm-hmm.
get destroyed by.
That's right. Okay, good. So the fish hatcheries a lot of times are related to are associated with coral reefs. Coral reefs are exquisitely sensitive to temperature changes, which are happening, but also pH. So like a lot of the calcium carbonate that is at the bottom of the food chain, so the diatoms and like zooplankton and the coral reefs and whatever kind of shellfish, all of them use calcium carbonate, and the more acidic the water, the harder it is for them to form those shells properly and utilize the calcium carbonate that's in their structures. So an acidic and when you debase the bottom of the food web, that's going to mess the whole food web up to the higher levels where we're extracting the protein from, like codfish and this and that, whatever it is that we're eating out of the ocean. Carbon's important. So one of the most important things about carbon is simply its central role in the process called photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is the basis of the food chain, the food web on Earth. It was first described by this guy Jan Baptista van Helmont in the 16th century, or I guess 17th. So he was arrested in 1634 during the Spanish Inquisition and charged with the crime of studying plants and other phenomena. But they put him under house arrest, and when he was under house arrest, he began to consider how plants actually grow. And so here are some excerpts from his journal. Countless tons of mass hangs in thin air above our heads at all times. But where does this bulk come from? All right. What do the trees build themselves from? So he had this experiment where he took a bunch of soil and he weighed it. He stuck a plant in it, a willow shoot, and then left it to grow, watering it when it was needed. After 5 years, he dug the plant out from the pot, shook off all the soil, and weighed the soil. The soil had lost hardly any mass at all, only 2 ounces of mass, whereas the tree itself had gained something like 74 kilograms. Pardon me. Where did all this mass come from? Where did all that mass come from? Well, of course it came from the air, right? The carbon dioxide that the plants had taken up that carbon dioxide was reduced through the process of photosynthesis and formed into sugars, specifically cellulose in the willow tree that he was growing, cellulose being wood pulp, right? So the wood pulp is made of carbon dioxide. Here is the overall equation for photosynthesis. The little lowercase n just means some number of molecules of carbon dioxide and some number of molecules, the same number of molecules of water are going to combine, I'll finish my sentence, with each other using the energy of sunlight and releasing diatomic oxygen in the process and fixing this carbon as a carbohydrate, a molecule of the formula CH2O and that same subscript N, a carbohydrate. All right, so that's how the energy of the sun is captured during photosynthesis. We'll come back a little bit to this on Monday, and then I'll talk about DNA cells and GMOs. Any questions?